Now that we learned how to factor by grouping, I can show you how to factor a general quadratic trinomial, in other words, with the leading coefficient not equal to 1. So if we have two brackets here multiplied together and expand it all out, we have this general trinomial. Now the coefficient in front of the x squared term is not equal to 1, so we can't really use the method that we did in lesson 2. However, there are different methods to factor general trinomials. I will show you one, and the one that is shown in the textbook. But if you know another method that is just as efficient, like the cross method or another method, you can use that one if you're used to doing it that way. So of course, we want to find two brackets multiplied together that will give us a result. So how do we go back and find the numbers 1 and 5 in the bracket? Well, first we can multiply the coefficient of the first term and the last term. So 2 times 5 is 10. Now we need to find two numbers that multiply to 10 and adds to the middle number. Now the numbers might come up again to 2 and 5, but let's list all the factors that have a product of plus 10. So of course that's 10 and 1, and negative 10 and negative 1. Also 2 and 5, and negative 2 times negative 5 is also plus 10. Now which one has a sum of 11? And that's 10 and 1. Now these are not the numbers that go in the bracket. These are the numbers that we're going to rewrite our middle term, which is 11x, into the sum of 10x and 1x. So notice we have 4 terms. So we're going to do factor by grouping, just like what we did in the last lesson. So something common in the first 2 terms, that is 2x. So factor the 2x in the first 2 terms. The last 2 terms, there's nothing common, so let's just take out a plus 1, because notice we get the x plus 5 back, which is the same thing as the first bracket. And the common factor now is x plus 5, so now you can completely factor. Okay, so a hint, of course, is to always find a common factor first, and then we can use these 3 steps to factor our general quadratic trinomial. Okay, so for example 2a, the leading coefficient is not 1. Okay, so we have to do it the long way, the factor by grouping. So multiply the first number and the last number together, and that's a product of negative 12. Now, there's a lot of factors that have a product of negative 12. Okay, there's negative 12 and 1, 12 and negative 1, there's 6 and 2, each one with a negative, and there's 4 and 3, which were the original numbers, but it's not necessarily those ones. Okay, so here's a good list. Now, if that something comes up that the numbers have to add to plus 4. Okay, so that's 6 and negative 2. Now, we rewrite the trinomial, but instead of 4x, we write plus 6x minus 2x, because it's still equal. Okay, and then negative 3. But we have 4 terms now, so we're going to factor by grouping. The first 2 terms has a common factor of 2x. And the last 2 terms, notice it's almost the same here. So the common factor is negative 1. So take out minus 1. And we want that second bracket to be the same as the first, because now it is common to each term. And now we've completely factored. Remember these factoring questions, you can always verify your answer, expand and multiply the there's 4 multiplications, and you should get back the original expression. Okay, so we'll do one more, but this time with a second variable. So we have an x squared in the leading term and a y squared in the last term. So it's pretty similar to the ones we did in lesson 2. We'll just have a y term in the bracket. So these numbers are bigger. It might be a little bit more difficult. We multiply these two numbers together. So that has a product of negative 80. Now there are a lot of factors in negative 80. I can list a few, okay, but you can see that the difference, okay, or the sum has to be 8. And 18 times 10 is 180. So the difference between 18 and 10 is 8. So one has to be negative, and because the 8 is positive, then the bigger number has to be positive. So this is going to be rewritten. So the middle term will not be 8xy anymore. It'll be the sum of these two numbers with xy. So 18xy minus 10xy in the last term. Okay, the first two terms have a common factor of 6x. And the last two terms are both negative, so I'm going to take out a negative 5y as a common factor. Okay, so that results in 2x plus 3y. Perfect, because that's our common factor. And now we have two brackets multiplied together. Okay, so do the practice examples, and you can pause the video at any time. Okay, so we should look for a common factor first. And here there is none, so I'm going to multiply 3 and negative 12. So that's negative 36. Okay, there's a few that comes to mind, but the difference is negative 16, so I'm thinking 18 and 2. But with the negative, we have to have the biggest one as negative. So 18 and 2. So rewrite 16x okay, common factor, first two terms, and common factor the last two terms. You want the bracket to be the same. Okay, so that's the answer for A. B, we are working with the variable t, but it's the same concept here. Negative 72 is the product, which have a lot of factors, right? Because 2 goes into 72, also 3, 4, and 6 as well. Okay, 9 and 8. Okay, the difference has to be 1. So don't look at the extremities, but look at somewhere in the middle. So 9 and 8 have a difference of 1. The positive has to be on the biggest one. So we rewrite 1t as plus 9t minus 8t. Okay, and then do our common factors. Okay, now it doesn't matter which bracket comes first here. You can write the 3t minus 4 first, and that applies to every question. For question C, there's a y squared term at the back, so we got to make sure we have a y term in there. Multiplying 12 times negative 5, that's negative 60. Okay, again, there's a lot of factors for negative 60. Okay, so there's 6 and 10 that comes to mind, but there's also 2 and 30, right? One of them has to be negative, but notice that the difference is 4, so that's too much on the extremities. There's also 3 and 20, again, that is too far apart. So look at something a little bit more closer in range. So 10 and negative 6, so that has a difference of plus 4. Here, this time I'll put the other bracket first, okay, just to show you that the order doesn't matter. Okay, the next one, it could be a little bit easier because of the factors of negative 10. So 5 times 2, or sorry, negative 2 is negative 10. Okay, so there's just 10 and 1 and 5 and 2. So we'll figure out which one is negative and which one is positive. Okay, the difference has to be plus 9, so it's 10 and negative 1 are the numbers that replace 9x. Okay, now I should mention also that there are two ways to do this question, because if we had written the negative 1x first and the 10 later, there's still something common in the first two terms and the last two terms. Okay, so there's a different combination there of terms, and you'll still have the same answer. You'll just get the 5x minus 1 as the common bracket instead of the x plus 2. But the final answer will be the same. And again, that's true for each question. Okay, so for E, we have a product of 60. Okay, so list all the products of 60. And that's positive 60. So we have two options. We have two positives multiplied together and two negatives. Okay, notice that the result has to be a negative. So those are going to be two negatives. So I'll just list all the negatives. Okay, so they have to add to negative 6, so that's, sorry, negative 16, which are negative 6 and negative 10. And it doesn't matter if you put the negative 6 and first, because notice there's still something common with the first term and negative 6. Okay, which so it doesn't matter. You're still going to have the same answer. The common factor is just n on the first terms and negative 2 in the last. And this is the final answer. Okay, the last question has a y squared term at the back, so we'll have a y term in the brackets. Multiplying 3 times negative 14, that's negative 42. Okay, so again, there's not a lot of factors of negative 42. There's 3 and 14, which we just did, but that's too far apart because the difference has to be 1. There's a 1 here. Okay, so 7 and 6. Which one is negative? Which one's positive? Well, the sum has to be positive 1. So the bigger number has to be positive. Okay, common factor, each pair of terms. Okay, and there's the final answer. Okay, so again, you can practice some more with the homework questions from the textbook.